How's your morning been so far?
Wonderful.
I don't imagine that you have a morning routine of any kind?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's pretty diverse depending on what's going on.
Sure.
We work on a very diverse range of engagements, so that I could be here or practically anywhere else.
Sure. Yeah, I don't imagine that when it comes to tradition, you have the 7 things that you do every morning.
No.
Coffee, maybe, is always
Coffee
one of them.
is actually the one thing that
Yeah.
I heard recently that massive amounts of coffee is good for you.
Yeah.
Not small amounts. That's the key.
I think that's probably true. Yeah. Okay, so I kind of mentioned you grew up just north of Toronto, and in some ways you started out very much against the odds of being here today. What about living like a student for decades? Do you think sort of made it possible to do what you do now?
Well, one of the things that I get asked a lot by students when I do presentations and they see the work that I do, they want to live that way. They want to be involved in that kind of work, and they find it hard to imagine how they get from where they're standing to doing that. And that's really, in some ways, almost all the questions are about that challenge of how do we get from, I'm going to university, I have a degree in design in some way, and I want to commit my life and work to something that I really believe in. And it seems like the whole kind of work world is opposed to that you're not supposed to do that, that you're supposed to submit to somebody else's vision of the future and work on that. And so when I was quite young, I had a kind of, when I first started working, I had this kind of vision that around the world there was this kind of thin film. And it's like there was a kind of filament that surrounded the whole world, and around that world there were particles. In that filament there were particles very, very widely dispersed, and those particles were people who were looking for me. They didn't realize it, but they needed me, and I was certainly looking for them. I realized that there were people out there who saw the world the way that I did, and I somehow had to kind of get in touch with them. I had to find them. And in order to do that, I had to do work that was very pure in the signal that I was giving out, so that I could give out a pure signal, so that eventually that signal would pass through that thin filament, and that one person in Rotterdam would see it and hear it and find me.
Sure.
And in order to do that, you have to live very modestly. And if you want to do the work that is really your work, you have to be very modest in the way that you live in order that you have the freedom to do the right things. And I did that kind of, it wasn't a big kind of intellectual project for me. It was kind of by accident. I just did the things that I loved. Most of that didn't have any money. And so I lived like a student as a consequence, not as a strategy. And I did that for a really long time, because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for people to find you.
Right.
And I was very fortunate. I was very, very fortunate that amazing people found me, and I found them. And I'm probably, I consider myself the most fortunate designer of the last half century. I have worked with the most amazing people working in our time.
Sure.
It's been, it's just extraordinary. The life that I have is beyond my wildest dreams.
Mm-hmm. What would you attribute that to? What?
I think it goes back to that commitment to real contribution to the world, a kind of ethical, definition of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting to me. I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Why designers are so important in the conversation these days. And how do designers get into it, into that conversation? And I think it's because the fundamental idea of design is to make the world a better place. That really, I've never met a designer who wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, my idea is to make things worse.
Right.
The kind of core idea behind design is, can we do this better?
Sure.
And can we make a better way of doing it? And that is driven by an ethical commitment to society. And the more you know, the broader that ethical commitment becomes. So the more that we understand global warming, the more we actually have to design to address that. The more we know about the impact of pollution and toxins, and the more science there is, the more complex and broad the mandate for design becomes.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And sort of going back too, but about what you said about connecting with people that you had like-mindedness with, being able to sort of create change through finding these sort of kindred spirits in some way. Would you say that today in 2014, that's a lot easier to do or more difficult because of the saturation of our connectivity and trying to find those kind of relationships?
I think it's a lot easier to do. I mean, if you think about, when I started, it was, it's like, people were still using Gutenberg technology. I'm not kidding. People used hot metal type. When you made an ad, the way that you actually sent the ad to other people was in taxis. Right? So it's so crazy to think about it. You make an ad, you sketch it up, whatever it is, you send it in a taxi to the client. The client says, great. Sends it back in a taxi. Says, great. You send it to the typesetter. The typesetter does it, sends it to you. It's wrong. Send it back. It's done again. Right? And if you could look at a city, 35 years ago, you would see the superimposition of the taxi business and the design business was. You could see where the design agencies were, because that's where all the taxis were, right? Because they produced so many taxi rides as a consequence. So if you think about that world, when I went to, one of the big things for me that really changed my life was a young man named Derek Unglis, who was a creative director in Toronto, who went on to be the creative director for Esquire magazine and Rolling Stone and many other things. But he was from London, and he was working in Toronto on a really cool magazine. And he just said to me, call them. They want work. And I was like, yeah, they do. All right, so call them and ask them to work with you. And so he was one of the people who really kind of blew my mind into a global perspective, to say, people everywhere in the world want to collaborate, so call them and work with them. And when I moved to London, I had no contacts, nothing. I stopped in on a friend in New York, a guy named Nigel Holmes, and he was the design director for Time magazine, and he sent a telex to London to his friends at Pentagram to say, you should check this guy out when he gets there.
Wow.
Right. So finding people in that world was infinitely more difficult than it is today. If you have an interest, you just press that button,
right?
And there's a million people around the world who share your interest, who want to advance what you want to advance.
Sure.
So it's a very different opportunity. I think the challenge remains how to live in a way that you can pursue it. How you can live in a way that you're free to explore the ideas that you're committed to.
Sure. And a lot of that, and I've heard you talk about it before. You left Bruce Ma Design about 4 years ago, and are concentrating mostly on master change right now. it kind of comes back to this long game and living with a global mindset. What is it about going from this quick interconnectivity, really fast thing that doesn't work as well for you as maybe playing more of a long game and having more long-term living strategies?
Well, I think that if we look at the long-term implications of what we're doing, I think part of the, almost all the problems that we face are, first of all, problems of success, not failure. Which is a very weird, like when you think about it that way, it's a very weird way of thinking. But all the challenges we have are success challenges. If we failed more frequently, we would have a lot fewer problems. In other words, we'd be 1 billion people. And we could behave like frat boys, and it wouldn't make any difference. Like we could do anything, and it wouldn't have any impact whatsoever on the environment. But as we've grown to 7 and going to 10 billion, everything that we do has an impact. And we're starting to see, it's not that we set out to damage things. When we invented the car, we didn't say, hey, let's really trash the environment. Let's set up a geopolitical conflict that's going to last for decades. We set out to make a beautiful thing that was a beautiful experience. But we didn't see the long-term implications of it. We didn't actually really calibrate, wow, if we make hundreds of millions of these things, it could have a damaging effect on the environment.
Right.
And so what we realize now is that almost our whole economy is driven around increasingly short-term thinking. So it's not only are we not thinking 5-year plans or annual results.
Right.
We're thinking milliseconds. People are now designing economic engines that are driven by the change in information in a millisecond. And if you can actually tap into a pipe that is millionths of a second earlier than the people at the next station on the pipe, you can have information that can make billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. So more and more we're in this kind of crazy short-term economy, and we need long-term thinking. We need long-term perspective in designing that.
For sure. I guess the thing that still confounds me, though, is like, with all of this connection, with these milliseconds of communication, with we're not getting in taxis anymore and delivering our ads. Mm-hmm. How do you find meaning in that? How can you try to? Impact just becomes so much more fleeting because it's coming at you constantly. So how can you sort of, what I'm saying? Like, how can you make more of an impression?
Well, it is certainly making it more challenging. If you think about the number of images that we're consuming, the amount of information that we're managing every day. Mm-hmm. It's more in a day than it was in a lifetime only a few decades ago. So the amount of information that you have and you will process today was a lifetime of information for people for most of history.
Sure.
So it is very demanding, but at the same time, something interesting is happening, which is, if you think about when I started, it was an opaque world. So if a brand or a business or a government put up an image, you had no way of getting around that image. You couldn't actually get behind it and see whether or not that image was true. You needed professionals to kind of run that down. Right. When Watergate happened, it was dogged professionals who just went after it and on and on until they eventually saw behind the image, and brought down the president. But today, the devices that we use, the technology that we use everywhere, is making everything accessible. So everything is transparent. You can see behind the image. And the example that we use, the best example that we use is Nike. Nike had an incredible brand, but back of house they were using child labor. And they didn't think that was part of their design. They didn't think that was part of the business they were in. They were just out in the market buying stuff.
Yeah.
So they thought, okay, we're going to get stuff produced. We're going to have producers sell stuff to us, and then we're going to package it and sell it for a big profit. And how those producers work, that's their business. Our business is branding, and we're going to market these things. But kids and people got into that system, and they connected the dots. And when that happened, when they were able to actually see that Nike says this, but it does this, they stripped billions of dollars out of the brand in the space of a few weeks. Mm-hmm. And it's still the case. If you Google child labor, Nike will come up on the first page.
Sure.
And it's a decade later. Now they come up because they're so advanced in actually protecting against the use of child labor. But for a long time, it was the opposite.
Right.
But that new world of transparency means that if everything is visible, everything therefore must be designed. Mm-hmm. If it's not designed to be part of the story, it may be telling a story that we don't want to tell and we don't agree with. So therefore, we must see the whole enterprise as a design project and design it to be the world that we want to live in. And we have to design our enterprises to be the way we want to live. And that's really that's what Massive Change Network is really committed to. It's the transition that I've experienced in my own work from that kind of visual, formal design, mm-hmm. where a lot of the heavy lifting is done by business people, and then they call in the designers.
Right.
Now, today, design is at the boardroom table. They're at that level thinking about the whole enterprise. I mean, that's the relationship that I had with Herman Miller, where I was on the design council for several years, and we worked with the CEO and the team, the senior team, and we did design reviews of products as part of it.
Sure.
But the bigger part, in a way, was actually working with the CEO and the senior team to think about the enterprise as a design. Mm-hmm. To say, how do we apply our resources in the best possible way to have the greatest impact, greatest positive impact in the world in the longest term?
Right. I guess one of your most recent projects kind of reminds me of that a little bit. In terms of designing a system, beyond just designing aesthetics, designing something where there's a concept that also has a bit of a heart and a bit of a soul, and sort of continues to inform how something grows and progresses. And it's the Museum of Biodiversity in Panama, uh-huh. Which just opened last month. Is that correct?
Yeah, just
been working on it for 13 years, but
it just opened a few weeks ago. I can show you some images. Hoping. Yeah. We started about 13 years ago, as you said. And I was in the studio. I've been very fortunate to work very closely with Frank Gehry. And Frank was really much more of a mentor for me, not only in my work as a designer, but also as a business person and just as a person trying to sustain creative life over the long haul, to actually manage that. And Frank is married to a Panamanian woman named Berta, and one day I was in the studio, and Berta handed me a dossier, and she said, you have to go to Panama. And because she's Panamanian, her cousins and friends and the whole group of people in Panama convinced Frank to design a museum of biodiversity. And so Frank met with them, and he said, what is a museum of biodiversity? And they said, well, we were kind of hoping that you would tell us. And he said, okay, Bruce, you got to go to Panama. Bruce is going to figure that out. So we went there, and we saw this incredible situation. There's a isthmus in front of the entrance to the Panama Canal. And they were going to build the museum on this site. So in one direction, you look at the boats that are going in and out of the Panama Canal, and in the other way, you look into the city. So you see Panama City from this place. And it's part of the old American Canal Zone. So for 100 years, America controlled that piece of Panama. And it was at the point where they were actually handing it back to Panama, and Panama was now going to take over this thing. And we did a calculation of what they were willing to invest in this place. And we said, this is like the United States building 63 Getty centers all at once. So the amount of investment that they were making relative to their economy was like U.S. building, if we built 63 Getty centers all at once, that's how big it was for them. And we said, we want to go back and actually start from the mandate. What's the mandate of this place? And design the mandate to be respectful and careful about that level of investment. Because if you're making that kind of risk, it's huge. It's huge. And so we designed this very simple mandate to educate, to network, and to declare. So the first concept is, if we don't educate, we don't change the way that people live. So the fundamental idea is you're going to understand biodiversity and its importance, and therefore I'm going to affect change in some way. So education is first. Network is, if we're investing that amount of money, we don't want to replicate what already exists. We want to make every dollar count. So let's think about everything that already exists and figure out how we can kind of insert something into that network that pushes energy to everyone else rather than drawing energy away. And so create the network, make the most of what you've already built. And finally, it has to be a declaration. It has to be something that everyone in the world will see and say, wow, we're committed to biodiversity. We're committed to this. We declare it to be important. And that means that it has to be visible. So we started a process, and this is the design, one of the early designs. We worked with Frank and his office and a team of scientists in Panama who are really incredible. And we kind of synthesized it from the inside. So we kind of said, okay, let's start from the mandate, and we're going to draw the story from the inside and articulate the vision and the story and the experience from the inside. And then Frank's team is actually going to work from the outside and be kind of building the kind of physical structures that make the most of that and work in the best way. And it was really conceived as an environment. So it's on a site, and the first thing we went there, the first day I went there, there was this huge tree on the site, and the ants were taking it apart. Right? The leafcutter ants were just like an army, right? Stripping this thing down, and like a highway across the forest floor, taking it to their nest. And for them, it was like, leafcutter ants. But for me, it was like, wow, this is awesome. Yeah. This is the museum.
Right.
Like, we don't want to, this is really the museum. And we came to the idea that Panama is the museum. And the scientists who are from the Smithsonian operates a really amazing program there called the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. And they really study, this kind of place of life. And they said, look, if you wanted to make an experiment in biodiversity at the biggest scale, you would do Panama. Because before Panama, there were 2 islands, North and South America. So those 2 islands had island ecologies. So completely different life forms in North and South had evolved. And at the time, there was one ocean. So one ocean ecology that was continuous between those 2 islands. And Panama is the last piece of the connection, the land bridge. And when it forms, you basically see the bifurcation in the life forms in the ocean. So before Panama, you have one set of species. The moment Panama happens, it bifurcates, and you have one set of species on one side and another set of species on the other. So it's basically a kind of proof point for the Darwinian idea. And on land, you have what is called the Great Biotic Interchange, where these two islands become one, and life from one side rushes north from the south and rushes south from the north. And you have this incredible killing spree of things eating other things that, they'd never had that kind of meat before. It's like fogo de chao, and on a massive scale. And it's still going on. Right? So, that's the amazing thing, is that the mammals, the big animals that can go quickly, they do the killing immediately. But the grasses and the moss and the mushrooms and all these other life forms, they're still moving north and south. So it's, a few million years later, it's still happening.
Wow.
So they sort of told us this story, I just thought, wow, that's such an incredible story. We're going to tell that story. And so we built this museum, just opened a few weeks ago, as was said. And this is the side that looks at the city, and on the other side you have the entrance to the canal. So boats that are bigger than the museum go by. But the most important thing is that if you see this, when we arrived in Panama, we went to our hotel, which is miles away. We opened the window, and it's like, woo! There's like a toucan, my wife said. Lisa said, there's a toucan perched on the horizon. And there it was. And so if you're entering the canal, you can't see this and not want to get off the boat. And it's like, what is that?
Yeah.
I got to go check that out. That's the declaration that we talked about. And so that was part of the mandate of the design. So Frank could have done a very modest, cool kind of building, but that wasn't the real project.
Right.
So this is what it looks like to enter it. And the first gallery that you enter is called the Panorama, and it's like, like you can't have this much fun legally as an adult. The first gallery is called the Panorama, and you're standing on a glass floor, and you're kind of midway through this glass. It's like a glass cube of cinema, as if you could take that cube and pick it up and put it into the ocean, right? And then pull it through the ocean and see all the kind of ocean life and all the different diversity of ocean life, and into the mangroves and up into the canopy and see the kind of diversity of canopy, and then fly it across Panama and see the diversity of biomes and extraordinary life. So this is that Panorama, and you can see how it works. It's very simple, actually. And we said, look, you just have to make a device that has 9 cameras and points in every direction, and then we're going to fly it into the canopy and dip it into the ocean. And they said, cool. and I have to say that going down there a few weeks ago, I was like, I hope this is good. It's so beautifully done. They did such an amazing job. And the Panorama, this is when the rain comes down, so you really, it's like you feel the Panamanian rain, which is unique, in the ocean environment. And at some point, a starfish moves underneath you. It's really beautiful. And it makes people spontaneously applaud at the end of every show.
Oh, that's great.
Which is quite something. I had no idea how they would react, but the response has been absolutely tremendous. And then this is another gallery. This is the Great Biotic Interchange. So these are all the species heading north and south. And we did it as if they were made out of ceramics, like giant ceramics. And you can see the kind of effect of it. So this is after the Panama has now been formed, and we can see the kind of effect of it. And again, they did an absolutely beautiful job. It's so beautifully detailed. Yeah. Like the characters of this theater, this ceramic theater, are kind of looking out at one another and kind of trying to figure out what the heck's going on while they're being exterminated.
It's a nice way of putting
And then
it.
throughout you're able to kind of explore the content more deeply. And then this is the next gallery, which is the kind of the story of human movement through Panama. So you have 4 different periods of human occupation of Panama, and you can see the kind of experience that it produces. Throughout the thing, they have selfie moments, right? Which I think is such a brilliant idea. That through the museum, they put these little stickers on the floor that are selfie spots. So this is one of them where you can see the museum behind. And this is BC and I at the museum enjoying the opening. So that's the project in Panama. And it is, I think, you can see that it's actually, the design is, of course, the physical visual thing that has to be, that has to be effective. But the more important design is actually the mandate. Mm-hmm. And what was so satisfying to me was how deeply they are committed to the mandate. They're absolutely 100% committed to the mandate and working intensively to realize it.
Yeah, it's an incredible project. I think we all wish we were there right now.
Well, we're actually working on the next thing that we're working on is it's open now, so you can visit it. But we're actually working on a festival that will happen there.
Oh wow!
That is really exciting.
That's amazing. And it'll be fully complete in a couple of years, do you think?
It's probably a year and a half of work still to finish off.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. I know we don't have a ton of time left before we start taking questions, but just to kind of come back to our original conversation, with just one more point I'm sure you make when it comes to what we're doing as brands and companies and also individuals, and what we own in this society, what we're able to put out there, and how much of it is ours. And I was just wondering, in terms of all of your sort of efforts, the one thing that kind of binds them together again is freedom and liberty. Uh-huh. And is there anything you're working on now that sort of addresses that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think for me, one of the things that is very exciting about being here in America is seeing how extraordinary America and Americans are. I think America is awesome. I think it's one of the greatest things that has happened in the history of the world. And I think Americans have a hard time seeing that. Or they see it in kind of very in a very kind of dominating way. And I don't think they fully understand mostly how important America is to the world. And there's an idea at the core of America. And we did a big project in Guatemala called The Culture of Life. And it was really about how to build a culture of freedom after 36 years of civil war. Mm-hmm. They had 36 years of the culture of death. They had to build the culture of life. And what we realized, we learned a lot about our own culture because we realized, wow, we don't even think about it. We have a culture of dreams. Everyone in this room, I bet, has a dream of what they still want to do. They have something they're trying to do. We take that for granted. Our kids, if you put a group of kids together, you say, what do you want to be? They'll have an answer. Yeah. Well, when you have 36 years of civil war, they explained their people had only, they saw the future as 3 ideas: violence, poverty, and corruption. They said, how do we imagine a future that's positive?
Sure.
So I think that concept that is underlying America, that idea of freedom, we have to re-embrace it and reassert it. And if you think about what's happening in data and in the kind of digital world, there's a black market in your data. So you go online and you do your thing and you do your phones, don't know if you heard about these new super cookies. Right? Super cookies are on your phones and in your computers. If you eradicate them, they will reassemble themselves, and they're super nasty by the phone companies, right, to track your data and sell it. And companies of all sorts are gathering all of your data and selling it on a black market, and that you have no interest in and no benefit from, and you're subject to it. And think about it. If you look at your credit score too often, it goes down. I mean, why? Shouldn't we want to look at it? I want to hire people who look at their credit score a lot. You know, that's the people I like. But we have all this, all that stuff is out there. And so we're working on a project called Personal Black Box, and it basically is a declaration of personal data independence. It allows you to own and control your data, to have privacy and the benefits that come with that, and never to compromise that in order to create value. So you own the data, and you get the value that's created by your data. Instead of that money going to the ad agency, we can send that money directly to moms with kids. Because the people creating the most amount of data are actually moms with kids. They make 70% of the buying decisions. So by creating Personal Black Box and the Personal Data Independence Trust, which is a legal entity that will actually have the data for you, where you own your data. We don't own it, we don't control it, we don't see it. So our company can't see the data. We can only provide benefits to you if you choose to have them.
To opt in, you're right.
And it's a different, I mean, it's a fundamentally different approach that really mitigates the kind of activity that's going on now. I mean, I think it's very, very dark. It's not in the spirit of America, because it's the opposite of freedom. If someone is tracking everything that you do, I mean, that is Big Brother.
Right.
We're designing PBB as Big Mother. How can we care for you? How can we help you? That's the best way to create value.
Yeah, it's amazing. I have 50 follow-up questions about that. I have about 100 other questions, but there's only enough time to have you guys ask a few questions now, I think. So if anybody has a question, just raise your hand and someone will come over with a microphone.
This is a perfect follow-up question, in my mind. Capitalism. Talk to us about capitalism and global economic capitalism as it relates to massive change and what's possible.
Okay. You know, I'm a Canadian. You know, in Canada, we don't have a right wing. Our birds fly in circles. So I'm practically a socialist. At least I come from that kind of social experience. But what I discovered is that I was very angry with a lot of really stupid social ideas. And I was equally angry with a lot of really stupid, hard right capitalist ideas. But on the other hand, I saw on the right and in the kind of capitalist world amazing, innovative things that I loved. And what I realized was that my political axis was oriented in the wrong direction. I don't think in left-right anymore. I think in forward and backward. There's a new political axis developing that is about people who are committed to a positive future rather than people who are committed to going backwards in some way. And I think what we saw was that across the spectrum you had advanced practices. You had advanced capitalism. I mean, what we're doing with PBB, with Personal Black Box, is advanced capitalism. It's a business. We have to make it a business. We have to make it make billions of dollars in order that it proves itself and can scale to the impact that it could have. But it's also committed to an absolutely beautiful social project that helps moms with kids get the absolute maximum value out of the work that they do. If you look at, for instance, one of the people that we met in Massive Change was a woman named Hazel Henderson. And Hazel is working on what she calls the caring economy. All that work that gets done, mostly by women, outside of our economy, caring for children, caring for elderly, all that work doesn't have a metric. Well, Personal Black Box actually gives it a metric. Like you can measure it, and you can be rewarded for it. And there are lots and lots of people who want to reward you for it. So it I think could be really transformative. And it is that kind of advanced project that really is both sides of the aisle, as it were.
Could you give your definition of design thinking and what's being done to activate it in our schools?
When I started as a communication designer, and that practice has migrated to what I think of as enterprise design, which is really design thinking applied to a whole system. And I was asked about it. I actually gave a lecture to a group of young leaders from England, and I showed them the work, and they said, well, what's the method? And I said, well, didn't you see the method? I showed it to you. And they said, no, you showed us the results. What's the method? And I realized, actually, there is a method. If you think about the work that we've done, I produced cities, and I produced carpets, and institutions, and social programs, and really diverse range. The method is, design thinking is that methodology that is, I think of as outcome agnostic. In other words, design thinking doesn't start with, we're going to produce this thing. It starts with, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the impact we want to create? What are the conditions that we're working with? How do we synthesize that and produce opportunities, and translate that challenge into opportunities, and then how do we execute those opportunities? And if you think about it that way, the real kind of foundation of design thinking is leadership. It's the ability to envision a future and systematically execute the vision, which really is leadership. And I think the more that we can actually, and this is really what we're working on with Massive Change Network, the more that we can actually package that in a way that people can download it into their own lives and use it in their businesses and their lives and the way that they do things, the more impact, the better things will be. It's really just a kind of problem-solving methodology that is agnostic to outcome.
I have another question over here.
Bruce, I heard you speak here a few years ago, and I think at that time you were just embarking maybe on the Massive Change Network project. Could you elaborate a little bit more on where that's gone over the past few years and where you see that headed?
Sure. BC and I have been working hard on this, and we did some things that I think were exciting, challenging in certain ways. We developed a program called 24 Hours to Massive Change. And the idea was basically to take that design thinking methodology, package it into something that we could download in 24 hours. Because I had this terrible idea that I could, if I had 1 hour with you, I could give you an experience of that one idea. And therefore, in 24 hours, you should be able to have all 24 of them and really have the kind of full toolbox. What we discovered is that people's brains exploded. Yeah. It was like, we had trauma. People really had breakdowns. Like, it was not pretty. And what we discovered is that it's way too ambitious to try that. And that, in fact, what we have to do is allow people to access it in a much gentler way. So starting next year, we're actually going to be doing design seminars that are open to anyone who wants to do it, because we're building out the creative capacity of the network. And so we're going to do a free monthly design seminar for people to participate. And what we've really done is realize that the Massive Change Network has kind of three dimensions, which is consulting. So we want to help businesses and governments and organizations apply this way of thinking to their enterprise. So we have a kind of group of people working on that. We have a publishing program that's starting to say, you know, where are the other people who are really thinking this way, and how could we take their work and get it out to the maximum number of people? And finally, we have an educational piece, which is the 24 Hours to Massive Change and packaging that. And we're still trying to figure out just how we do that, and how do we do it in such a way that where we're not the bottleneck. And currently I'm the bottleneck. There's only so much of that I can do. So we have to kind of design an interface for that that's more accessible to anybody who's interested.
Yes, Bruce, I was wondering if you could reflect on the effect of human longevity on the rate of massive change.
The effect of human longevity on the rate of massive change, staggering, has to be the way to characterize it. If you think about, I said earlier that if we had failed more frequently, we would have fewer problems. If you look at the growth rate of the number of people, everything else pales by comparison. How we behave, it's not that for 10,000 years we were saintly and in touch with the earth. Right? Like, we behave just as badly and even worse. I mean, if you looked at Panama, 400 years ago, you would have seen scorched earth, because the farming practices were so poor. They basically burnt everything down, farmed for 2 years. That's all they could get out of the soil. Then they moved on. So by the time, by 400 years ago, they had basically stripped the forest bare. All of it's reforested since then. So we've behaved badly for a long time. The difference now is that we can behave badly on a massive scale. And as individuals, I saw recently, just a few weeks ago, I saw a presentation by Rio Tinto of a mine, a huge mine, open pit mine, without people. So it's all connected machines. All the machines are autonomous. It's like a giant mine with those giant dump trucks that are 4 stories high. They're all driving themselves. They're figuring out what the best route is and how quickly they can, how to best access all the riches in the ore. So you take, that's now run by a few people. So the kind of impact you can have is staggering. When you multiply that by the quantity, you get what we call the impact double-double, which is that you're doubling your impact and you're doubling your numbers. So the effect of longevity pushes that curve up. Right? And almost nothing in our systems is designed for what's happening. So all of our insurance programs and life insurance and retirement programs, all these things are designed like you're gonna die at 75, and that ain't gonna happen. We're gonna live to hundreds. So we have to reconceive all of that and start to really design what we do for the new world. For the new world of people having capacity. The idea that you retire, I think is a kind of, it may be a temporary idea, that you should actually work for a time and then stop, and someone else should pay you. It's a kind of crazy idea, right? I mean, we've normalized it, but it's really crazy. And if you live to be 120, well, that can be like, 35, 40 years of that can be longer than your working life. So we have to rethink we're going to have to rethink a lot of those models and design them for the new reality. Because I think I personally can't imagine retiring. Like, I don't know what I would, why would I do that? I love doing stuff.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
Hi, Bruce. Question for you. Do you have an opinion about the growing disconnect of the young generation and their changing mental model and the fact that there are new languages emerging as, learning how to code as young people, and the fact that they don't understand or perceive why does our iPhone have a shutter sound to it? And how to design for that new generation and, in the world that more frequently has the prefix of hyper attached to it, and the fact that you were talking about the privacy issues, and the fact that the new generation, I don't know if they want a crusader for their privacy as much as we do, because their new behavior is this new networking glue of connectivity, and their mental model is changing very rapidly. And how do we, in this age, and I'm right on the cusp of being almost 30, I'm kind of in between the two worlds and trying to understand as a digital designer how to bridge the gap and understand which way to go, or do we save them from their own world since they don't have enough time to read 1984 and they don't get it. But is that okay or is it not? What's your opinion, or is there any agenda that you think of in that respect? Thank you.
I think we should tweet 1984, like one clip at a time until the whole book is out there. It's certainly a challenge because there's a new generation emerging that has no experience with the models that we grew up on. But I think that's the way the world works. It's been like that for a long time, that we use the formats of the old world to make the new world accessible. Like if you think about power books, Facebook, web pages, these are all concepts that come from book culture. And so we used book culture so that the new world of information would be, the mass of the population could actually access it. If you had invented entirely new forms, most people would have looked at it like, well, how do I get into this? How do I see my way into this? So there is, I think, a natural progression. My wife hates baby boomers, and even though I'm one of them, I just sneak, I just get in there under the wire, because she thinks that bulge of people has set the tone for everything. And that's why that freaking camera has to make that noise. Because they're such idiots that if they but I think it's actually, what's going on all the time is that we're inventing new languages. Like if you look, we've been involved very intensively with the new currencies. And PBB, personal black box, is obviously, what happens is very, very quickly is that it becomes a currency. It becomes a bank. And you can keep your wealth in that bank. So we can deliver wealth into, an off-the-grid place in Nigeria without any infrastructure other than a cell phone. And no one can steal it from you. So we will create new languages and new currencies and new possibilities, and there will be always a kind of, like I I just bought a little book that is iPad for Seniors. Because for my wife's mom, actually, but I may take a look at it. On that note, I think
I think that's it. Bruce, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.